I've always believed in noticing the little things, the subtle details that reveal more than words ever could. The way someone shifts in their chair when they lie, how their eyes dart away at just the wrong moment, or when a smile seems a little too perfect, too rehearsed. It's a skill I've honed over time, mostly as a means of survival. This morning, as I sat at my sister-in-law Lydia's dining table for our monthly family brunch, that skill was screaming at me. Tessa, my wife, placed a steaming cup of coffee in front of me, her lips curving into that sweet, effortless smile she had perfected over the years. "Made you a special coffee, honey," she said, her voice smooth as silk. "I don't claim to be a coffee expert, but I know how it should smell. The deep, earthy aroma, the rich bitterness that lingers in the air before you even take a sip. But this was different. The moment the steam reached my nose, something twisted in my gut. There was an underlying scent, faint, but unmistakable. Metallic. I didn't react. Didn't let a single flicker of suspicion cross my face. Instead, I picked up the cup, swirling the dark liquid slowly, pretending to appreciate her effort. "How sweet," I murmured, offering a small smile in return. For just a second, barely noticeable unless you were looking, Tessa's eyes flickered. Across the table, Lydia stirred her coffee lazily, her long nails tapping against the porcelain. She always played the role of the casual observer, watching, waiting, pretending she wasn't in on whatever was happening behind the scenes. But I had learned the hard way. When it came to these two, nothing was ever casual. Over the past year, I had been sick more times than I could count. Stomach pains that left me doubled over, nausea so intense I could barely stand. Emergency room visits where doctors, baffled, struggled to explain why my body was failing me. And always, it happened after a meal Tessa had prepared or during one of these brunches at Lydia's house. Coincidence? Maybe once, maybe twice, but not this many times. I had my theories, dark, twisted suspicions that any rational man would dismiss. But I had learned the hard way. Ignoring the signs didn't make them disappear. So today, I had a plan. I reached for my phone, pretending to check a message. Then, with a perfectly timed stumble, I bumped the table just enough to make the cups clatter, just enough to create a moment of chaos. "Ah, damn," I muttered, steadying myself. Tessa's hand shot out, fingers gripping the edge of the table, a natural reaction maybe. But her eyes went straight to my coffee cup. Not to me. The cup. That told me everything I needed to know. As I straightened, I reached out, smoothly switching my coffee with Lydia's. Quick. Effortless. The kind of move you learn after years of playing defense in a game you never signed up for. Lydia barely looked up, too absorbed in whatever she was typing on her phone. But Tessa, she noticed. She recovered quickly, forcing another smile, but I caught that moment of hesitation, the way her throat worked as she swallowed. "Careful, honey," she said lightly. "Wouldn't want you spilling that special coffee I made just for you." I chuckled, lifting the new cup to my lips, pretending to take a sip. The scent still lingered in the air, twisting my stomach into knots. But now, it wasn't my problem anymore. I placed the cup back on the table, watching, waiting. 30 minutes. That's all it would take. Lydia didn't know it yet, but she was about to become the proof I needed, the proof that my own wife was trying to poison me. 30 minutes. That's all it took. I sat there, calm and patient, observing as Lydia's fingers trembled slightly around the handle of the coffee cup. At first, it was subtle, barely noticeable, a slight hesitation in her grip. But I saw it. I saw everything. Tessa sat beside me, her body stiff despite the relaxed smile she kept plastered on her face. She was watching, too, though she tried to pretend otherwise. Every few seconds, her gaze flicked toward me, then toward Lydia, then back again, like she was expecting something to happen. The only problem? It wasn't happening to me. Lydia exhaled slowly, shifting in her seat. She rubbed her fingers against her temple, as if trying to shake off a headache. "Huh," she muttered under her breath. "I feel weird." Tessa's head snapped toward her, her smile faltering for just a second. "Weird how?" Lydia frowned, blinking a few times. Her normally sharp eyes looked unfocused, like she was struggling to keep up with the conversation. "Just off," she murmured. "My hands feel tingly." She flexed her fingers. "And my stomach." Tessa's fingers curled tightly around the edge of the table. "Maybe it's just the heat," Tessa said quickly, forcing a chuckle. "Or maybe you didn't eat enough this morning." I leaned back, resting my arm casually along the chair, pretending to be oblivious. Inside, my pulse was pounding. I knew that reaction. I had lived it too many times. The nausea that starts as a pit in your stomach, spreading like an invisible sickness. The dizziness that makes the world tilt slightly, just enough to disorient you. The tingling in the fingers. The sudden weakness in the limbs. I'd felt all of it before. And now, Lydia was feeling it. I glanced down at the coffee cup in front of me, the one that should have been mine. It was still untouched, steam curling lazily into the air. That strange metallic scent still lingered, taunting me. Tessa's hand reached for her own cup, but she didn't drink from it. She was watching, waiting. Then I saw it. The moment realization hit her. Her breath hitched. Her back straightened. And for just a fraction of a second, her eyes widened in horror before she masked it. Oh, she knew. She knew this wasn't an accident. This wasn't just paranoia on my part. She had planned this. She had expected me to drink that coffee. And now, as she watched Lydia's body betray her, the weight of her mistake was sinking in. The coffee was poisoned. And she had poisoned it. My own wife. I turned to Lydia, studying her carefully. Her breathing had quickened slightly, and her fingers gripped the table as if to steady herself. Her usually sharp tongue had been replaced by sluggish confusion. What exactly did you put in that coffee, Tessa? I asked, keeping my voice light. Casual. Tessa flinched. Lydia doesn't look too good, I continued, gesturing to her sister, who was now pressing a hand against her stomach. And it's strange, because that's exactly how I felt. Oh, let's say the last 5 times I've had a meal at your sister's house. Tessa let out a laugh, but it was forced, too high-pitched. Jordan, that's ridiculous. Is it? I tilted my head. Because I've been hospitalized. What, 3 times in the last 6 months? All with symptoms no one could explain. And now I don't drink the coffee, but Lydia does, and suddenly she's sick? I leaned in slightly. That's quite the coincidence, don't you think? Tessa's throat bobbed as she swallowed. You're being paranoid. Lydia let out a soft groan, rubbing her forehead. Her voice was quieter now, almost breathless. Tessa, what was in that coffee? For a brief moment, barely a flicker, Tessa's mask cracked. I caught a glimpse of something raw, something panicked. Lydia, don't be ridiculous. It's just coffee, she snapped, a little too defensively. Lydia blinked up at her, face pale. No, I said, standing up slowly. It's not just coffee. And you know that, don't you, Tessa? Her eyes darted from me to Lydia, then back again. Trapped. I pulled my phone from my pocket, unlocking it with a quick swipe of my finger. The recording app had been running since the moment she set that cup in front of me. See, here's what's going to happen, I said evenly, my voice carrying across the table. I'm going to call an ambulance. Lydia is going to get the medical attention she needs. And then, I'm going to make sure they run a full toxicology screen. Tessa's hands clenched into fists. You're blowing this out of proportion, she hissed. Am I? I raised a brow. Then why do you look like you just saw a ghost? She didn't answer. Lydia exhaled shakily, her fingers pressed against her chest. Tessa, she murmured, voice trembling. Tell me the truth. Did you put something in that coffee? Tessa's lips parted, but no words came out. She didn't need to say it. Her silence was the answer. I pressed the call button. 911, what's your emergency? Yes, I said, my voice steady. I need an ambulance at 318 Riverbend Lane. My sister-in-law appears to be having a severe reaction to something in her coffee. Tessa's breath hitched. She had lost control of the situation. And now it was my turn to see how far this would go. The moment I hung up with 911, the air in the dining room grew suffocatingly thick. Tessa's face had lost all its color. Her fingers clenched into trembling fists at her sides. Lydia groaned, forehead damp with sweat, gripping the edge of the table like she was trying to anchor herself to reality. I watched Tessa carefully. She was too quiet, not rushing to Lydia's side, not trying to comfort her, not showing the panic of a loving sister watching her sibling suffer. No, she was calculating. Her mind was working overtime, trying to figure out how to talk her way out of this. I wasn't going to give her the chance. You never expected me to make this call, did you? I said, my voice calm but firm. You thought I'd be the one slumped over this table, too dizzy to think, too weak to fight back. Tessa flinched, her lips pressing into a tight line. You're being ridiculous, she muttered, but there was no conviction behind it. This is just, Lydia probably just has a low tolerance for caffeine. I let out a humorless laugh. Right. Because caffeine poisoning just so happens to mimic the exact symptoms I had last month. And the month before that. Tessa's nostrils flared. Jordan, stop it. I took a slow step toward her, lowering my voice. No, you stop it. No more gaslighting. No more brushing things off. I know what's been happening to me. And now, so does she. I gestured toward Lydia, who was visibly shaking now. And guess what, Tessa? You made a mistake today. You tried to poison me again, and this time, the wrong person drank it. So tell me, what was in that coffee? Tessa's eyes flicked toward the front door, as if she was considering making a run for it. That's when Lydia, her breath coming in sharp gasps, spoke. Tessa, what did you do? Tessa whipped her head toward her sister, panic shifting into something sharper, something almost desperate. Nothing. I didn't do anything. She snapped. Then why do you look so scared? I asked, tilting my head. Shouldn't you be worried about Lydia right now? But you're not, are you? You're worried about something else. Tessa turned to me, her eyes dark and frantic. Jordan, just think for a second. Why would I ever try to hurt you? I took another step forward. That's the question, isn't it? Lydia let out a shaky breath, her fingers curling weakly against the table. Oh my God, she whispered, realization dawning on her face. The board meeting. Tessa froze. And there it was. The crack in her armor. A cold weight settled in my chest. I had suspected, but now I knew. That's why, isn't it? Lydia's voice was thick with betrayal as she lifted her head, her glassy eyes locked onto her sister. That's why you've been doing this to Jordan. You wanted him out of the way. Tessa clenched her jaw. You don't know what you're talking about, she muttered, but there was no confidence behind her words. Lydia let out a bitter, rasping chuckle. Oh, I think I do. She turned to me, her gaze flickering with something unexpected, guilt. Jordan, I should have seen it. I should have known. I frowned. Known what? She swallowed hard, hesitating for just a moment before speaking. Tessa's been after your position at work for months. The realization settled over me like a weight. My fingers curled into fists as I exhaled slowly. Of course. The Henderson account, the biggest client of the year, the contract that had the potential to change everything. And I had been leading the pitch. Tessa worked at the same firm, but she had been struggling to land major accounts. She was good at her job, but she didn't have the reputation I had built over the years. And Henderson, they had requested me personally. She must have seen that as a threat, must have believed I was in her way. Lydia's voice was thick with regret. She kept saying how unfair it was that you were stealing opportunities from her, that she was the one who deserved to be handling the firm's biggest clients. She let out a breathless, humorless laugh. I thought it was just talk. I didn't know she'd actually. Her voice broke, a shudder running through her. Tessa's hands trembled as she whispered, it wasn't supposed to be like this. I stared at her, my mind racing. What wasn't supposed to be like this? She looked up, something raw and desperate in her eyes. You weren't supposed to figure it out, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. A cold, empty silence stretched between us before she continued. You were just supposed to miss the meeting. Just one meeting. So they'd think you were unreliable, so they'd let me take the lead instead. Her voice cracked. But you kept bouncing back. No matter what I did, you kept showing up. And then they gave you the next big account. And the next. Her breath came in short, angry gasps, her frustration boiling over. Do you know what it's like to work twice as hard, only to be overlooked again and again? She snapped, her voice rising. To have everything you deserve handed to someone else. I stared at her in disbelief. Deserve? My voice was cold. You think you deserve my job? Tessa's face twisted with something dark and bitter, the last remnants of her mask slipping away. Yes, Tessa spat, her voice filled with bitterness. I do. Because I work just as hard as you, but nobody ever notices me when you're in the room. I'm always just Tessa, just another employee, just your wife. She let out a shaky breath, her expression twisted with frustration. I thought if you got sick just once, just one time, I'd finally get my chance. My stomach turned at her words. Lydia let out a wheezing, pained laugh. Well, congratulations, she choked out. You got your chance. And now you're going to prison for it. Panic flashed across Tessa's face. Lydia, no. I didn't mean for this to happen. She cried desperately. Shut up. I snapped, my voice like ice. Tessa flinched as I pulled out my phone and tapped the screen. My tone remained cold and steady. I recorded everything. You just confessed to poisoning me. Her eyes went wide with horror. No, I didn't mean. Doesn't matter. I cut her off. You said it. And the police are already on their way. Tessa's face twisted with a mix of rage, panic, and sheer disbelief. You, she started, but the distant wail of sirens stopped her mid-sentence. Her head snapped toward the window, her hands trembling violently. Lydia exhaled shakily, her voice barely above a whisper. You're done, Tessa. It's over. For the first time since this nightmare began, realization dawned on Tessa's face. She had lost. The sirens grew louder, and her breath quickened. She looked like a cornered animal, her eyes darting to the front door, the windows, the hallway, anywhere that might offer an escape. But there was nowhere to run. I didn't take my eyes off her as I moved to stand beside Lydia, gripping my phone like it was my lifeline, because right now, it was. Moments later, the paramedics burst through the front door, their movements brisk and professional as they rushed to Lydia's side. What are her symptoms? One of them asked, already kneeling beside her. She's dizzy, weak, nauseous, I answered, stepping back to give them space. Her hands have been shaking. She's having trouble keeping her balance. Lydia groaned as one of the medics checked her pulse, then flashed a light into her eyes. Her pupils are dilated, he murmured to his colleague. Possible toxic reaction. Tessa stood frozen, Her face drained of color as she watched in silence. The paramedic turned to her. "Ma'am, do you know what she ingested?" Tessa's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. "I do," I said calmly. "She drank my coffee, the one my wife made specifically for me." The paramedic cast Tessa a sharp glance, his face unreadable. "Do you know what was in it?" Tessa's lips trembled. I just made regular coffee," she whispered. Without a word, I pulled out my phone and pressed play. Tessa's own confession echoed through the room, sealing her fate. "You were just supposed to miss the meeting, just once, so they'd think you were unreliable." The paramedic's head snapped up, his expression shifting from neutral concern to something much more serious. "We need to get her to the hospital now," he said firmly. Two medics lifted Lydia onto a stretcher as she whimpered in pain. "I'll ride with her," I said quickly, my voice leaving no room for argument. Tessa took a shaky step toward me, her face pale. "Jordan." I didn't let her finish. I turned on my heel and walked away, leaving her standing there as a police car pulled into the driveway. The ride to the hospital was tense. Lydia's breathing was shallow, and every few minutes, she shivered violently despite the blanket wrapped tightly around her. I sat beside her, watching helplessly as the medics administered oxygen and monitored her vitals. "Jordan," she murmured weakly. "You knew, didn't you?" I swallowed hard. I had my suspicions. She let out a faint, bitter laugh. "Guess we both learned the hard way." I didn't respond. There was nothing to say. When we arrived at the hospital, nurses rushed Lydia into a treatment room while a doctor immediately began firing questions at me. What she ate, what she drank, when the symptoms started. I told them everything. Then, without hesitation, I handed over my phone. I recorded her admitting to it. I told the attending physician, "Check Lydia's toxicology report." I'd bet my life this isn't the first time my wife has done this. The doctor's expression darkened. "We'll run every test necessary." 2 agonizing hours passed. I sat in the waiting room, hands clasped together, thoughts spiraling. I replayed everything in my mind. The months of unexplained illness, the lies, the dismissals, the careful way Tessa had orchestrated it all. The pieces fit too perfectly. She had planned every step. Missing a single meeting had been just the beginning. When that failed, she escalated, each time pushing further, testing how much she could get away with. And now, she had gone too far. The sudden swing of a door pulled me from my thoughts. Dr. Phillips, a tall woman with sharp eyes and silver-streaked hair, approached me with a no-nonsense expression. "She's stable," she said without preamble. "We were able to flush most of the toxins from her system. She's weak, but she'll recover." I exhaled a breath I hadn't even realized I was holding. Dr. Phillips studied me carefully. "You were right to be concerned," she continued. "The toxicology report confirmed the presence of a non-lethal but highly potent compound, one that shouldn't be in any food or drink. We're running further analysis, but the initial results are alarming." My jaw clenched. "How alarming?" I asked, my voice tight. Dr. Phillips hesitated before handing me a tablet. The screen displayed a list of chemical compounds, most of which were medical terms I barely recognized, except for one word. "Rodenticide," I murmured, my voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Phillips nodded grimly. "A slow-acting poison commonly used in pest control. In small doses over time, it causes fatigue, nausea, and muscle weakness. But in concentrated amounts." She met my gaze, her expression grave. "It could be fatal." My stomach twisted. She hadn't just been trying to sabotage me. She had been trying to kill me. "Would you be willing to speak with law enforcement?" the doctor asked. I let out a slow, measured breath. "I already have evidence," I said, "and I'm not stopping until she pays for what she's done." Dr. Phillips gave a slight nod, as if she had expected nothing less. Just then, a voice cut through the sterile quiet of the hospital. "Jordan." I turned, and there she was, Tessa, standing at the entrance of the waiting room. Her hair was slightly disheveled, her breathing uneven. Flanking her were 2 uniformed police officers, their hands resting on their holsters. "Don't say a word," one of them instructed. Tessa's eyes locked onto mine, filled with an emotion I couldn't quite decipher. Fear, desperation, maybe even remorse. "I didn't mean to," she whispered. My blood ran cold. The officer nearest to her stepped forward. "Jordan Bennett, we'll need a formal statement from you." I stood, meeting my wife's gaze, the woman I had once trusted, the woman who had claimed to love me, or at least pretended to. "Don't worry," I said, my voice steady. "I'm ready to talk." Tessa's lips parted as if she wanted to plead, to beg, but she knew it was too late. She had already lost. The officer turned to her. "Tessa Bennett, you're under arrest for attempted poisoning, reckless endangerment, and conspiracy to commit harm." The words echoed down the hospital corridor. Tessa inhaled sharply. "Jordan." I held up a hand. "Don't. Just don't." Her face crumbled, her carefully constructed facade shattering in an instant. I turned away as the officers led her down the hall, their footsteps heavy against the tile floor. Dr. Phillips placed a hand on my shoulder. "This isn't over yet," she murmured. I nodded. "No, it's not." But for the first time in a long time, I wasn't the one at risk. Tessa was. And now, she was going to face the consequences of what she had done. Later, under the harsh glow of fluorescent lights, I stepped into a small, sterile interrogation room. The dull beige walls made the space feel even colder, the air thick with an unsettling stillness. Across the metal table, Tessa sat with her wrists cuffed, her posture rigid. She looked different. It wasn't just the physical toll of the past few hours, though the stress was evident in the exhaustion lining her face, in the messiness of her once perfect hair. It was something deeper. For the first time in our marriage, she looked small. Tessa had always been composed, calculated, always in control. She was the kind of woman who never let a strand of hair fall out of place, who could walk into a room and command attention with a single glance. But now, she was just a woman sitting in a police interrogation room, waiting to see how much of her life was about to fall apart. I sat down across from her, folding my hands on the table. She refused to meet my gaze. "Why, Tessa?" I asked, my voice low but firm. Her shoulders tensed. "Don't act like you don't know," she muttered, still avoiding my eyes. "I want to hear it from you." She let out a sharp, shaky breath. "I already told you, it wasn't supposed to be like this." I scoffed. "Oh, right. You only meant to make me sick, not kill me. That makes it so much better." She flinched at the bitterness in my tone, but I didn't care. "I need to understand," I continued, keeping my voice even. "I need to know how the woman I married, the woman I loved, could do something like this." Finally, she lifted her eyes, and for a brief moment, I saw something flicker beneath the cold calculation. Regret, shame, or maybe just the horror of getting caught. Tessa inhaled slowly. "Do you know what it's like, Jordan?" she asked softly. "What?" I frowned. "To be invisible," she whispered. I shook my head. "Tessa, what the hell are you talking about?" She let out a bitter laugh. "You don't get it. You never had to get it. Everything has always been so easy for you." Her gaze sharpened, her fingers curling into fists. "You walk into a room, and people listen to you. They respect you. They want to work with you. Meanwhile, I've spent years busting my ass at that company, and no one ever saw me." I exhaled through my nose, forcing myself to stay composed. "So you decided to poison me? That was your solution?" Her jaw tightened. "It wasn't supposed to go this far." "You keep saying that." I leaned forward, my stare unwavering. "But it did." Her throat bobbed as she swallowed hard. "I just wanted a chance. A real chance. But every time I thought I had an opportunity, you were there, taking every promotion, every major client, every account I worked twice as hard for." Her voice wavered. "So yeah, at first, I just wanted you to slow down. Just enough for people to finally see me." I shook my head in disbelief. "You don't sabotage people you love, Tessa." She blinked rapidly as if my words had struck her, but she didn't deny it. "You know what the worst part is?" My voice grew rough. "I trusted you. Even when I started getting sick, I never wanted to believe it could be you." Tessa's face twisted, her jaw clenching. "And yet you did," she murmured. I narrowed my eyes, because the truth was impossible to ignore. Then, quietly, Tessa spoke again. "And Lydia?" I tilted my head. "What about her?" She let out a slow breath. "Is she going to be okay?" For the first time since this started, Tessa looked genuinely afraid. Not for herself, but for Lydia. "She's stable," I said carefully. "But she could have died, Tessa." Her lips parted slightly, her hands trembling against the table. "She wasn't supposed to drink it," she murmured, almost to herself. "It was never meant for her." I leaned forward. "And I was never supposed to figure it out. But here we are." Tessa's gaze met mine, and for the first time, I saw real remorse in her expression. But it wasn't enough. Not even close. "Do you regret it?" I asked. She exhaled sharply. "Getting caught?" "Yes." I let out a cold laugh, shaking my head. "Of course. Because if I had just gone along with it, if I had kept drinking whatever you put in front of me, I'd still be sick. You'd still be winning, right?" Tessa didn't answer. That's what I thought. Another long silence passed before she took a deep breath and squared her shoulders. "I should talk to my lawyer," she muttered. I stared at her for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Yeah, you should." As I stood, pushing my chair back, her eyes flickered with something. Maybe she had expected me to say more. Maybe she had hoped for some kind of absolution. But I wasn't offering it. Not after everything. "I'm done, Tessa," I said, my voice firm, unwavering. "You made your choices. Now you have to live with them." She didn't argue. She didn't beg. She just watched as I turned and walked out the door. The moment I stepped into the hallway, the weight on my chest lifted. Tessa had spent months trying to tear me down, trying to make me weak. But she hadn't won. I was still standing. And now, I was ready to watch her fall. As I walked out of the interrogation room, I knew there was no going back. Tessa's betrayal was no longer just a suspicion or a nightmare that haunted me in the quiet hours of the night. It was real, and now she was going to pay for it. Detective Morrison, the lead investigator, met me just outside the room. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man with tired eyes, the kind of cop who had seen far too much of the worst parts of humanity. He exhaled as he flipped through a small notepad. "Well," he said, his voice edged with exhaustion. I crossed my arms. "You heard everything?" He nodded. Every damn word. What Tessa had said, and what she hadn't, was enough to confirm what I already knew. This wasn't some misunderstanding or a desperate woman making a mistake. It was intentional. Detective Morrison shut his notepad and gave me a long, assessing look. "We're moving forward with formal charges," he said, "but we need more than just her words to ensure this sticks in court." I squared my shoulders. "What do you need?" He motioned for me to follow him down the hall. "We've already secured a warrant to search your home," he explained as we walked. "If she's been poisoning you for months, she had to keep whatever she was using somewhere. The toxicology report from your sister-in-law already confirmed foreign substances in her system, ones that don't just end up in coffee." I clenched my jaw. "So if we find the source, then we have a rock-solid case," Morrison confirmed. When we reached the hospital entrance, 2 uniformed officers stood beside their patrol car, waiting. My heart pounded against my ribs as the reality of the moment settled in. Tessa's life, the one she had so carefully built, so desperately protected, was about to come crumbling down. And for the first time, I didn't care. Arriving at the house was surreal. Walking through what had once been my home, I watched as officers moved methodically through each room, checking cabinets, drawers, even behind the fridge. I stood in the doorway of our bedroom, silent, as one of the officers searched through Tessa's nightstand. "You lived with her every day?" Morrison said beside me. "Did she ever seem nervous? Like she was hiding something?" I let out a slow breath. "She was careful. Very careful. She never left anything obvious out in the open." I paused, my eyes scanning the room. But I knew Tessa, and I knew she wasn't invincible. We moved to the kitchen next, where one officer was already digging through the spice cabinet while another checked the pantry. The detective in charge of collecting evidence suddenly turned to Morrison. "We've got something." I followed them to a lower cabinet near the sink, where an officer carefully pulled out a small black box and placed it on the counter. At first glance, it looked unremarkable, just an ordinary storage container. But the moment they opened it, the air in the room shifted. Inside were bottles, small, carefully labeled vials filled with substances I didn't recognize. Some still had their original pharmaceutical labels. Others didn't. Morrison picked one up, his expression darkening. He turned it over in his hand before passing it to the evidence technician. "This," he said grimly, "isn't something you buy at a grocery store." I stared at the collection before me, my stomach twisting with nausea. All this time, Tessa had been keeping a meticulous stock of whatever she had been using on me, as if I were nothing more than an experiment. One of the officers handed me a folded piece of paper. "You might want to see this." I unfolded it, my hands tightening around the edges as my eyes scanned the contents. It was a list, dates, dosages, effects. She had documented everything. Every single time I had fallen ill, every headache, every emergency room visit, every unexplained sickness. Tessa had written it all down as if she were conducting some sick, twisted study. Morrison let out a low whistle. "Well, this is damning." I swallowed hard, my pulse roaring in my ears. "You're telling me?" The realization hit me like a truck. She never planned on stopping. If I hadn't switched that cup with Lydia's, if I hadn't started questioning things, would I have survived the next dose? Would she have gone all the way? The thought sent ice through my veins. Morrison motioned to the officers. "Bag all of it. We're done here." Back at the station, I watched from a distance as Tessa was led from her holding cell to another interrogation room. She didn't fight, didn't try to run, but when her eyes met mine through the glass, she hesitated, just for a moment. Something flickered in her gaze. Regret? Or just fear of what came next? Detective Morrison gestured for me to step into the observation room. From here, I could see and hear everything, but Tessa could no longer see me. Morrison sat across from her, setting the black box on the table with a deliberate thud. Tessa's entire body tensed. "You recognize this, don't you?" Morrison asked. She didn't answer. "You kept records," he continued, tapping the sheet of paper I had read earlier. "You documented every time you poisoned your husband, the amounts, the effects, even how much stronger you needed to make it each time." Tessa's jaw tightened. Morrison tilted his head. "Tell me, Tessa, was there ever going to be a point where you stopped? Or was Jordan just a problem you were planning to permanently remove?" She inhaled sharply, but again, she didn't deny it. Morrison sat back, shaking his head. "Here's the deal. You're facing multiple charges, and trust me, none of them are going away. The evidence speaks for itself. He gestured toward the vials. These chemicals don't just end up in someone's coffee by accident. Tessa's hands trembled slightly in her cuffs. I wasn't trying to. Save it, Morrison cut in. The only thing left for you to decide is whether you want to fight this in court or cooperate. Tessa's face twisted, her breath unsteady. Morrison didn't press her. He didn't need to. We both knew the truth now. There was no coming back from this. Tessa had destroyed her life with her own hands, and as much as part of me wanted to feel sorry for her, I just couldn't. This was justice. The courtroom was silent as the judge entered, his expression unreadable. I sat in the front row, my hands clenched together, watching as Tessa was led inside. She looked different from the woman I had married, smaller, weaker, as if the weight of her crimes had finally settled onto her shoulders. Not once did she look at me. The trial had been long, grueling, and painfully public. The media had latched onto the story early on. A successful businessman, slowly and methodically poisoned by his own wife in an attempt to destroy his career. The details were too sensational for them to ignore. Tessa's defense team tried everything, painting her as a woman driven to desperation, overshadowed by her husband's success, pressured by a competitive industry. They argued that she hadn't intended to cause permanent harm, only to level the playing field. But the evidence was overwhelming. The prosecution dismantled their claims piece by piece. First, the toxicology reports. Substances found in my system were traced directly to the vials recovered from our home. The slow-acting poison administered in carefully measured doses. Enough to make me sick, but not immediately arouse suspicion. Second, the recordings. My secret recordings from that brunch where Tessa, in her frustration and entitlement, confessed to sabotaging me. The sound of her own voice sealed her fate. Third, the documented pattern. Her handwritten notes, discovered in our kitchen cabinet, meticulously detailing my symptoms. The prosecution called it a systematic experiment in cruelty. And finally, the witness testimonies. Lydia, her voice trembling as she recounted how Tessa had dismissed her concerns over the years. My colleagues, who described my unexplained illnesses, my declining health, and how Tessa had subtly planted doubts about my reliability. When the lead prosecutor delivered his closing statement, I knew it was over. This was not an accident, he declared, pacing the courtroom floor. This was premeditation. Tessa Bennett did not act out of desperation. She acted out of calculation. She saw an obstacle in her husband, and instead of working harder, she tried to eliminate him. Tessa sat stone-faced as the jury was dismissed to deliberate. It didn't take them long. Just 2 hours later, they returned. The judge asked the foreman to read the verdict. My heart pounded. We, the jury, find the defendant guilty on all counts. Tessa inhaled sharply, her mask finally cracking. I let out a slow breath and closed my eyes for just a moment. It was over. The judge wasted no time. Given the overwhelming evidence, Tessa was sentenced to 25 years in prison without the possibility of parole. The words echoed through the courtroom, a final, undeniable truth. But I didn't celebrate. I didn't cheer. Because in the end, no one won. Tessa had lost everything. Her freedom, her career, the life she had once valued. And I had lost a woman I had once loved. After the sentencing, I stepped outside the courthouse, the crisp air biting against my skin. Reporters swarmed, cameras flashing, voices shouting over one another. How do you feel now that justice has been served? What would you say to Tessa if you had the chance? I ignored them. Because the truth was, I didn't feel anything. Not relief, not anger, not even satisfaction. Just exhaustion. A soft voice pulled me from my thoughts. Jordan. I turned to see Lydia standing a few feet away, her face pale but steady. Though still recovering, she looked stronger than she had in the hospital that day. You okay? I asked. She let out a small, bitter laugh. Am I okay? My sister just got sentenced to prison for trying to poison my brother-in-law. So no, not really. I sighed. Yeah, same here. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then Lydia shook her head. I don't understand her, she murmured. She had everything. A good career, a husband who loved her, a life she built from nothing. And she threw it all away. I didn't respond right away because, truthfully, I didn't understand it either. I think, I said finally, Tessa convinced herself that nothing she had was ever enough. Lydia exhaled, rubbing her arms against the cold. Do you think she regrets it? I thought back to the courtroom, to the way Tessa had stared blankly at the table as the judge read her sentence. I don't know, I admitted, but it doesn't really matter anymore. Lydia nodded because, in the end, Tessa's regrets wouldn't change anything. She had made her choices, and now she had to live with them. Months passed, and life slowly moved forward. Tessa's trial had been a spectacle, but soon, people found new stories to obsess over. The headlines faded, the whispers quieted, And I healed. It wasn't instant, and it wasn't easy, but day by day, I rebuilt. The Henderson account, the very contract Tessa had tried to sabotage, ended up securing my career. After hearing about the trial, the firm doubled down on their trust in me, offering more opportunities, more clients, more success than I had ever imagined. Tessa had tried to destroy me, but in the end, all she had done was make me stronger. 1 year later, I stood at the podium of a corporate event, staring out at the sea of faces in front of me. I had been invited as a keynote speaker, a recognition of my resilience, my work ethic, my success. As I stepped up to the microphone, I let the moment settle before I spoke. Success isn't just about talent or hard work, I began. It's about integrity. It's about the relationships we build, the trust we earn. I paused, my mind flickering back to everything I had endured. Sometimes, the biggest obstacles in our lives come from the people closest to us. And when that happens, we have two choices. We can let it break us, or we can let it fuel us. A quiet murmur ran through the crowd. I smiled faintly. I chose to rise, I finished. And I'm standing here today because of it. The room erupted in applause. As I stepped away from the podium, shaking hands with my colleagues, I realized something. I had survived. Tessa had tried to take everything from me, but in the end, I was the one who had won. 1 year. It had been exactly 1 year since the trial ended. 1 year since Tessa had been sentenced to 25 years in prison. 1 year since I had walked out of that courthouse carrying the weight of betrayal, relief, and exhaustion all at once. And yet, despite everything, I was still here. Stronger. Thriving. I took a slow sip of my coffee, the first cup I had truly enjoyed in a long time, before setting it down on the polished mahogany desk in front of me. My office was quiet, save for the distant hum of traffic outside the high-rise window. The skyline stretched before me, a stark reminder of how much had changed in just 12 months. A year ago, I had sat in this very chair, my mind clouded with doubt, betrayal gnawing at me like a slow poison. My career had been in shambles, my personal life even worse. I had spent months questioning everything. How I could have been so blind, how I had let someone I loved so deeply turn against me. But that was then. And now? Now, I was at the top of my game. After the trial, the Henderson account, the very project Tessa had tried to sabotage, became one of the most successful campaigns our firm had ever handled. Clients took notice, my reputation soared, and as Tessa faded into irrelevance, I rose higher than ever before. Jordan? I glanced up from my desk as my assistant, Lauren, stepped into the office. You have a call online too. It's from Nashville State Correctional. I went still. I didn't need to ask who it was. Tessa. I hadn't spoken to her since the trial, hadn't written, hadn't visited, hadn't acknowledged her existence. And yet, here she was, reaching out from the prison cell she had so carefully built for herself. Lauren hesitated. Want me to tell them you're unavailable? I stared at the blinking light on my phone, debating for a moment. Then, I nodded. Yeah, do that. She gave me a knowing look before disappearing down the hall. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. Tessa had already stolen enough from me. My time, my trust, my peace of mind. I wasn't about to give her another second. That evening, I met Lydia for dinner. It had become a tradition of sorts, checking in with each other, making sure we were both healing in our own ways. She had struggled after the trial, too. Losing her sister had left a void in her life, even after everything Tessa had done. Guess who called me today? I said as I poured her a glass of wine. She didn't even hesitate. Tessa. I raised an eyebrow. How do you know? Lydia let out a tired laugh. She called me last week. I frowned, and she shrugged. Begged for forgiveness, said she regretted everything. Asked if I could help her get an appeal. I scoffed. An appeal? After everything? Lydia swirled the wine in her glass. Yep. She swears she wasn't in her right mind, that she never meant to hurt you. I studied her carefully. Do you believe her? She hesitated, then sighed. I think she regrets it, but not because she's sorry. I think she regrets getting caught. I nodded. That was exactly what I thought too. Lydia tilted her head. Are you going to visit her? I let out a short laugh. Not a chance. She didn't argue. Instead, she raised her glass. To moving forward. I lifted mine in return. To moving forward. Months passed. The media stopped talking about Tessa, people stopped whispering about the trial, and for the first time in years, I stopped thinking about her. I could wake up without feeling like I had to look over my shoulder. I could go to work, meet with clients, live my life without fear. One afternoon, as I prepared for another high-profile pitch, my phone buzzed with an email notification. I almost ignored it until I saw the subject line, Henderson account contract renewal. My eyes scanned the message, my pulse quickening. They were extending their contract for another 3 years. I sat back in my chair, a slow smile spreading across my face. Tessa had tried to take everything from me, Yet despite all her efforts, I was still winning. That weekend, I took a trip out to the lake. I hadn't been back since before everything happened, but standing there, watching the water ripple under the afternoon sun, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in a long time. Pulling out my phone, I scrolled through my saved messages. With a deep breath, I deleted every single one of Tessa's texts, the ones where she played the doting wife, the ones where she pretended to care, the ones filled with passive-aggressive remarks about my career, my success, my future. One by one, I erased them, and with each deleted message, I felt lighter, freer. Tessa no longer had any hold over me. Her choices, her betrayal, her downfall, those were hers to carry, not mine. And as I walked back to my car, taking one last look at the lake, I smiled. Not because I had won, not because she had lost, but because, after everything, I had finally found what she never could, peace. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.